So when we left before lunch, we were talking about living with less than complete knowledge. The next one, of course, that's a wonderful supervisory attribute to have and to model is the one of open to new learning. It's important for us as field instructors to model the openness to new learning. Often I find I run across in my day job as a trainer with new social workers coming into the department, and certainly as a field instructor with folks still going through their first degree in social work, this belief that I've learned that. And I think it's very important that we model, that we learn not only across the breadth of subject matter, but we also learn with a depth of content. For example, I've worked in the area of trauma and resilience now for over 30 years. I'm still learning. I'm still learning. I'm still learning the depth. And I intentionally, with intention, communicate that to my students. Gosh, there's a lot to learn about trauma. I'm still learning about trauma and resilience. I'm doing a lot of reading now on complex trauma and what that is like, and how to engage in a conversation with respect to survivors of complex trauma. So it's important to almost have those out loud conversations with yourself in the student's presence. It sets them up to be a lifelong learner. Learning is not just in chunks. It's not a sequential exercise. It's a process. And I think that's very important. It sets them up to constantly be examining and re-examining and learning and engaging in learning in their practice, in their field. Okay? The other one, of course, is organization, and obviously we have to model that, and it's good. Some students require a lot of work in this area and others don't. But certainly students do need to learn through their placement not only how to organize their time and organize their work, but most critically how to organize and catalog their thoughts and their feelings. Because this one, organization, is going to have a direct impact on compassion and composure, which are very critical skills when you're working with people. If you're disorganized and you're thrown off kilter very easily because you can't seem to get yourself organized in your head, then that becomes a problem. So we spend some time on that one. Approachability is a big one. Not only do you have to feel approachable and be approachable and have the desire to be approachable, you have to be able to demonstrate that. And it's only through the demonstration of approachability that people become at ease. And people who are at ease are in a resting state, and people who are in a resting state are able to learn. Well, we like them somewhere actually between the resting state and alert, right? So we talk quite a bit about that, and I have them do quite a bit of reflection work in their journaling on approachability. For some of the students, that feature is present on their collaborative map, on their plan. It becomes part of their learning objectives. Some students have to begin using a mirror. I have them use a mirror and they've got to look at themselves. How are you feeling right now? I'm feeling pretty good about it. Well, you don't look good about it. Your face actually looks rather pinched. And that's going to throw people off, particularly if you're working with kids. So we start learning how they can present as interested, engaged, genuine, and that they're listening. I usually start that in the training room with some of the folks that we have in training through SD, And I certainly do it with the folks who are interning with me. I wait, obviously, until I have a bit of a relationship on the go, but then I'll say to them, have you really been listening to what I've been saying? Well, yes, Lisa. Well, feed it back to me. And they'll feed it back to me, and I'll say, but you know, you didn't look it. You look kind of bored. Did you feel bored? No. Okay, we need to work on that, because we need to line up what you're communicating non-verbally with what you're genuinely feeling. Because kids and people who are really stressed about meeting with you, they're going to see bored, and they're not going to listen. So we need to work on that. Because remember, we talked about you're the tool of your trade. You are, in fact, a tool. And they usually laugh about that. But so we have conversations about that, and because I find that a lot of the folks, particularly when they begin their career as social workers, naturally are stressed. But they look stressed, but a stressed person can also look judgmental, closed, and bored. Think about it. So we do quite a bit of work around that. I have them focus on their eyes. And I talk to them about how when I used to do a lot of work with kids, I used to wear contacts, because kids always watch your eyes. Kids always watch your eyes. So I remember when I was being mentored and coached to work with kids effectively, that's where my coach taught me how to make sure that my eyes were open and were soft. So I'd often spend time with my students teaching them how to make their eyes go soft. Doesn't that sound silly? But it's a good skill to learn. Because again, if people are stressed and scared, or if they're kids, they look at your eyes, and if your eyes aren't soft and gentle looking, then they become somewhat defensive, because it looks like we could be going into battle here. So that's sort of a skill that I guess I force myself to be conscious of, to model, and I also bring it back to them, because some students may need to do more than just reflect on it. Some may need to actively work on it as one of their learning goals before they move into the field without you to mentor them and coach them. Compassion is a biggie, and it's another one. It's not enough to feel compassionate. You have to demonstrate it. You have to demonstrate it through your words and through your body language. So we spend quite a bit of time talking about the area of compassion. In order to do that, I ask them to do reflective journaling on empathy. I want to hear them feed back to me, what are moments when the mom you're working with feels joy, when the dad you're working with feels joy? What are the moments that give them pain? And if they can't answer that, then I know they haven't had a discussion at any depth with those two individuals who they're working with. You can't feel empathy for someone you really don't understand. And you really don't understand someone if you don't see them as a someone, and they remain a client or a file or a case. So we spend some time sort of going back and looking at that. And it helps people move away from, it's a domestic case, it's an abuse case, it's a sex abuse case. Because it's never that. It's always a cluster of very unique people with very unique stories, having a very unique, sad experience, painful experience. And I want the student to be able to tell me about that. Not just tell me they're working with a sex abuse case or a senior case. Who is the senior? Tell me their story. Okay. Composure. That's another one that often features on most of the student interns' collaborative mapping, is often most often one of their learning goals is to sort of stay calm while others about you are losing their heads. Social workers often are going into situations that often are very charged emotionally, and social workers need to be often the calm, moral, ethical compass in the room. So if folks are connected to what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what's really going on about them, and they act and speak with intention, then they can maintain their composure. Because I don't want people flying about reacting. I want people responding to what the assessment is telling them is the best way to work with the individual or individuals in the situation that they're in. So we do spend some time talking about what I call in their learning goals, grace under pressure. And they kind of like that. It sounds old-fashioned and kind of nerdy. But we do talk about that. We do talk about that. And I say, you know, if you react, then the message that you're giving your family is that Rome is burning, we need to start running. And really what we want people to do is to start thinking and figuring out, where would I like to be and how do I get there? And what are the first small steps? And composure allows you to do that. So we do talk a bit about that. Actually, quite a bit. Conflict management. I ask the students to intentionally find a situation of potential conflict. It can be with a friend, it can be in the classroom, or it can be in their placement. I really don't care. But I really would like them to leave the placement knowing about how to manage a conflict and not walk away from it. The last thing we want, certainly in the field of child welfare, and I would suspect in any other field that you're working in social work, is to have a worker who, when things get tough, they just run like a cat to the litter box and start covering it up. Right? So I do that with them, and I say, you know, we don't want to do that. So I want you to create an opportunity for me to see that you can step up and deal with conflict appropriately. And I usually give them a reading if they don't already have one. Most of them already have some reading on conflict management. But if they don't, I'll give that to them. And I ask to see that they can do that. I prefer it to happen in their placement, but if it happens in real life, I like to hear reflections on that as well. Okay? Confronting issues is another big one. Often I find one of the myths around using the solution-focused interviewing or around using the collaborative approach is that you're always nice and you always talk about nice things and we all ride on unicorns into the rainbow. But one of the things I like them to be able to do is to be able to identify with me what the non-negotiable coming down the road could be in their work with this client or family, and how they're going to frame that up. Because in every relationship there are some non-negotiables. Typically they're unspoken, and typically they rear up in a time of crises, and then there's a breach of trust that happens after that. So I like folks who are doing their internship with me to be able to forecast for that, what could be the possible non-negotiables. In child protection, it's always child safety. In other areas, that typically it has similar issues to do with safety of the person, another adult, themselves, or somebody vulnerable. And I like them to be able to have that conversation. I'd like them to be able to initiate that conversation and feel comfortable having it. That's one of the rare times in the placement experience where I actually will do role playing with them on that, because I really feel it is a critical skill. I usually start out that session by talking to them about what the non-negotiables are in the placement. By then, I've known them for a while. It's usually about a month and a half into placement before I have the discussion, and I'm able to actually identify a non-negotiable that's quite personal for their circumstance, right? Personal to them and personal to their placement. And we talk about that, and then I expect to see them replicate that not too far down the road and do some reflective journaling on it with me around that skill set. Because that's another skill that I think is absolutely critical for social workers to have. It's sort of like you can't work well with trauma if you don't work well with resiliency. It's that balance. You can't work well identifying and working with strengths and resources if you're not equally comfortable talking about non-negotiables and the areas that have to happen, or else. Right? So social workers need to become comfortable with that. Some become too comfortable and move to the authoritarian model, so we have to talk a bit about that, because we talk about all interventions being a balance. It has to be a marriage between full collaboration and authoritarian, somewhere in the middle. And I like to see them almost feel what it's like when they move across that spectrum of practice. So they do quite a bit of journaling on that, and I ask them, where do you think you were when you had that discussion if I were to graph you? Would you be over here on more the authoritarian? Would you be more over here with collaborative? And isn't it interesting, when the discussion moved to here, you were more somewhere in the middle. When you discussed about this, it was somewhere more authoritarian. Because if they're going to be effective working with domestic violence or sex abuse or neglect, they have to become very comfortable talking about stop behaviors. There's just no other way to put it. And finally, creativity. I like them to think outside the box. I like them to think about, is this the only way this could be done? Is this the only way you could have this conversation? Is this the only way the case planning activities could be? Are there other ways to approach it? Is there other ways she might choose to achieve the same end? If she's looking at acquiring abstinence with respect to drinking, is there any other path she might want to take? How do you know this is the only path? What did she say that convinced you that this is the right path for her? What convinced you that this is the way that she's going to accomplish these particular activities? How confident are you that she's going to accomplish these activities? What makes you say that? So constantly getting them to reflect back, do I have the evidence to support what I'm thinking? Or is it just an assumption based on my hopes and my dreams that have nothing at all to do with what she's thinking? Okay? And that's all the critical work that can be done through reflective journaling. And if it seems to be more of a struggle than not, then it then becomes transferred over to a collaborative plan where they actually have to, with intention, work on that skill set. And I explain to the students, I'm still working on some of these myself. This is life in progress. This is the journey we're taking on if we wish to become human. If you want to scale Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these are the skill sets that will get you there.